Good morning, welcome to my channel. I'm Dr. Paul Karitzis, and today I'll be continuing with another esoteric symbol, this time sulfur of the Tria Prima, which if we look at on the diagram here, we have superior and inferior. It's that symbol there. So, of course, representing the circle here, representing the macrocosm and the microcosm, and the symbol sulfur is right here. It's the triangle surmounting the cross of the elements. Sulphur pretty much first appears as a generative force in the 8th to 10th century tractate entitled Liber Misericordia within the alchemical compendium Corpus Jabarianum, which has been attributed to the Arab polymath Jabir Hayyan, the pseudo-Jebba. According to pseudo-Jebba's theory, all substances in the cosmos are comprised of philosophical sulfur and mercury acting on the prima materia or first substance, and of course philosophical, they're called philosophical to distinguish them from the crude elements of the same name. In this cryptic system of knowledge, the action of combustible sulfur, composed of the elements fire and air as well as the secondary qualities of hot and dry, reacted with fusible mercury, composed of the ethereal elements water and earth, along with the qualities of wet and cold, to produce the bodies of the 7 metals under the respective influence of the 7 planets. In order to correctly denote the meaning of sulfur, we must adhere to an animistic interpretation that sees the world as a living organism contained of intermingling and interconnected fragments. On the Tabula Smaragdinum, or the Emerald Tablet, Her Mistress draws attention to 13 precepts that garner an idealistic impression of alchemy as the quintessential law or process that enables all of creation. Hence, we should abstain from any attempt to grasp or understand this esoteric symbol using a purely mechanistic or reductionist approach. Looking at creation from a dualistic perspective then, sulfur might be described as a volatile, fiery and active masculine spirit which confers form to all things by binding their vital essence to the corporeal realm. In this way, sulfur enters into the sublunary sphere of generation to act upon substances and partake in the transformative process without ever suffering any violation or fundamental change to its own anatomy. This formative energy behaves rather elusively. It remains concealed when coagulating the body of a substance or object to render it dry and hard, and will only reveal itself during the retrograde stages of uncreation, namely during chemical trials heated by distillation, putrefaction, and dissolution. The latter is sparked by ethereal quicksilver, or mercury, a generative force that complements philosophical sulfur by rendering itself into a purer and more receptive plastic-like substance for the fixation and coagulation of superior forms during each conjunctionis or new marriage between the two of them. It mirrors physical attraction between male and female in that the beauty of the feminine aesthetic temporarily disables the opposite before prompting the former to tap into a wellspring of unknown pristine strength and liberate itself from its own conceptual margins. Final causes decree that sulfur will evolve into a pure action potential, otherwise known as gold or spirit, through the agency of quicksilver, in quite the same way that a fertilized egg morphs into a human child inside the mercurial womb of its mother. It goes without saying that the sulfuric seed can inhabit a great many forms, perfected or otherwise. Philosophical sulfur can act as a stand-in for planetary bodies like the sun, the condition of an incarnated light, the state of waking consciousness, the day, the ego or the personality, the metal gold, and the mineral diamond. When speaking of the ethereal element, many alchemical treatises will warn against the acidic, corrosive properties of its rudimentary state. Philosophical sulfur, they claim, will char, corrupt, destroy, and even invoke the devil within you if you do not arm yourself with the appropriate prophylactics. Clearly, the allegory dissipates before our very eyes if philosophical sulfur is substituted for one's ego or personality. Ego consciousness is rather short-sighted and has a tendency to associate exclusively with its own needs and wants, as well as with its own feelings, doubts, and predicaments. Left unchecked, these can balloon into devils that will infuse themselves into the axis of our souls, incite polar reversal there so that we're thrown into a nuclear winter of a fiery hell, and subsequently cannibalize us from the inside out. The only way forward is through purification, a chemical distillation aimed at purging the personality of its carnal drives, or at the very least shifting the axis of our conscious minds so that they point to the higher constellations of our unconscious minds. In so turning our attention elsewhere, we are attaining two milestones on the road to self-actualization. Firstly, we're acknowledging that the cosmos is much grander and all-encompassing than our own inwardly turned and ephemeral egos. And secondly, we're detaching ourselves from our caustic sentiments and even subjugating them. In retrospect, one might say that the alchemical symbols act as individual ciphers that map out an entire hidden system of knowledge regarding the processes of creation and can thus impart a wealth of information to anyone with the intuitive talent to construe them correctly. Matter also works on quite the same principles. Contrary to the short-sighted view of our 21st century crude science and medicine, alchemy has always been of the opinion that everything that exists possesses a vital principle or life-bestowing essence. This should ring true to any inquiring mind, given that it is quite impossible to reduce any living body, so any mineral, animal or plant, to its physical composition without the loss of its animating principle. The life essence or blueprint is none other than the philosophical sulfur and mercury combined, and can be separated from base matter by subjecting it to the ordinary chemical processes like maceration, distillation, and decoction. Originating from a mother matrix, this powerful and active dual force is identical in all adherents of one particular hierarchy, but proceeds to manifest at a different vibrational frequency in each of the mineral, plant, and animal kingdoms. In its pure state, philosophical sulfur appears as a delicate oily substance and can be separated from philosophical mercury through ordinary distillation. Knowing how to alchemically separate these principles from plant matter or the like, and then resynthesizing them, produces homeopathic elixirs whose medicinal powers exceed that of any pharmaceutical one 100-fold. In China and Tibet, these occult principles adhere to a body of conventional scientific knowledge that came into existence roughly about 2,000 years ago under the aegis of macrobiotics, a denomination of Eastern inquiry which also sought the elixir of life. The esoteric symbol for sulfur is comprised of two rudimentary shapes. So it's basically a cross surmounted by a triangle. The first represents the four cardinal directions and the ethereal elements, whilst the second is an exponent of masculinity, generation, and action potential. In the arrangement, the triangle is in an ascendant position in relation to the elements, meaning that the generative force is always acting, fixing, and colouring individual combinations of the latter into new forms. That concludes our lesson on sulfur of the three principles. I hope you've enjoyed it, and join me next time for the excerpt on mercury of the Tria Prima. See you then.